welcome to Property Quorum. As ever, we return once again, the stalwarts of Property Quorum, of course, Juliet Babula of Gunnercook, Chris Gilson of Root Home, and Hamish McClay of Search and Convey, talking about all topics that affect you, me, and everyone else out in that property market. And today we're talking about ethics in practice, a thorny subject at best. And as ever, Hamish, I'm throwing you straight under the bus. There we go.
Well, it becomes apparent to many of us once we've been actually sort of working within property that there's information that we sort of require, and there's basic information which is almost one expects to sort of come through. However, now and again there are details which should also be included, and quite often it would be to do with detrimental aspects of the property which people decide not to pass on. And it's a matter of a decision as to whether people actually do this or not. However, we also have a sort of malfunction in a way of the way councils keep their records, because they don't actually keep in there all of the information which they could, which sometimes we're not exactly buying a pig in a poke, but we're buying a pig that we don't know the background totally to. With that information, we would be able to make a far better decision. It's better to find it out early on rather than sort of later on when it either holds up what's going on, and Juliet's got so much more digging to do. But we do need that transparency. And with transparency comes ethics, and also comes honesty too. The last thing we want to do is to have an abortive sort of transaction where everybody sort of is wasting their time, effort, and money because the full information hasn't been fed through to us.
Juliet, it seems obvious to pass to you. Are we buying a pig in a poke? Are we, in fact, taking the turd and rolling it in glitter?
Well, I mean, if we do that, we've just got to dissect it and find out, where that glitter's come from. And, what I mean by that is, for example, me, I've got to, if I onboard a new client, I've got to do my diligence in terms of who they are, whether they are who they say they are they a politically exposed person, the source of funds, where are they getting these monies, is it money laundering? And one of the things that the Law Society has now done is they've attributed a criminal liability to solicitors if you get it wrong. And that's just to say how important and serious an offence is by not doing your diligence on your clients, etc. And, some of what Hamish has said, it surprises me that people make genuine mistakes. You might not know. We had a deal once, Chris and I, where someone left a lot of garbage in the loft. And I genuinely think they didn't realise that they'd left that, and they rectified it. They paid for it to be cleared, etc. But then you've got people who knowingly would leave stuff and not disclose it and be cheeky enough to think, oh, no one's going to find out, or they can't have any recourse because by the time the transaction's finished, I'm out of the equation. And what people don't realize is that at some point, the bugs come out. We all are aware of what the issues are. And if you lie, if you fail to disclose and you blatantly lie, there is potentially a misrepresentation claim that can be thrown at you. So it's not simply, I'm not going to disclose it and hope for the best thereafter. There are repercussions and consequences. So, I mean, ethics plays a big part, and you've got people like solicitors who are obviously governed by the SRA, and our level of ethics is at a whole different level to, say, the average person. But it boils down to the individual, I think. If you feel like something's wrong, or you feel like, look, I need to disclose something, then have a word with a professional dealing with the matter. And not just rely on, well, it's buyer beware. If you've got mice in your property, disclose it. I had someone who went to a prime property in central London the other day, and hand on heart, the seller swore there were no mice. I mean, everywhere in central London, there's mice. And all these mouse traps are all over the house, except it's, dead giveaway, but you're lying on the one hand. There's someone wanting, you've got a going rate of 3 million for a property. They don't want to have to deal with a mice infestation or have to deal with that cleanup. Yet you're not disclosing it. So that, again, I go back to it being a balancing act, but ethics is something that if we all took it really seriously from a personal perspective, we wouldn't have half the problems that we're having in this sort of the chain that we call conveyancing.
Good Lord. And ethics, Chris, that's a thing, of course, which is where most people within the property sector are completely above board, aren't they? They respect the ethics that need to be applied to such an important transaction.
He said, tongue in cheek.
It's
a strange one, Gareth, because I was raised I think we all have an ethical and a moral perspective and a compass that points in a certain direction, and most of us will listen to that all the time. I'm not sure whether it's a sign of the times or whether we're just seeing more of those bad apples that are brought forward and publicized, and obviously we now have 24/7 bombardment of these types of stories.
Right.
I'm not sure if that plays into it, and that we seem to be exposed more and more to these types of scenarios. Most people that I know, I was raised around to have good moral fabric, to think or behave in an ethical and moral perspective, in a way that you would expect others to as well, and expect to be treated in the same way. So it's confusing to me in many ways why people wouldn't do what they say they're going to do and act in ways that they would expect others to act towards them. So yeah, it has me scratching my head in many different ways. So yeah, I'm confused by the question in many ways.
Well, of course you are, but because you are a morally unambiguous fellow. But the trouble is, it seems that although some of us, when we're born, as soon as we can read a map, we're handed that compass with the word morals written on the top of it. Would you believe that it's getting worse out there? That there are less and less people following the rules of morality as opposed to just the diktat of law?
I don't think it is the case. I think that with the legal structure that we have, there's an ever-increasing burden in terms of the regulation overhead that keeps coming down. Things don't get repealed, so the statute book seems to just get bigger and bigger. And similarly to the concept of buyer beware, you're meant to understand and know all these statutes. The old one is that ignorance is no defense. So it's extremely complicated to live in our modern day world and know where you're potentially putting a foot wrong in terms of the legal frameworks that are on the books. But if you take a step back and think of it from a more moral perspective, what is right and wrong, it does get a bit easier. But I'm not sure if it is escalating, or if there's more of a spotlight on bad behavior, and it's generally that's the thing that sells papers. So that's the thing that's going to be pushed more often than not. So I'm not sure.
Sells papers, eh, Chris? What are those? I barely remember. Julia, is it true that ignorance is by no means an adequate defense to having made some of these fundamental blunders, but yet a lot of people seem to coat themselves in a blanket of it, and yet still blunder through, and it appears to succeed. It makes the rest of us who are trying to be moral and trying to stick to the rule of morality wonder.
But you use the word ignorance, and to be honest with you, I look at people daily, whether it's, and this is not me being condescending, but I might meet a solicitor on the other side and they're telling me something and I know that it's wrong, and it's almost as if you've got to have that line between, not crossing that professional line, because really they should know. So there are people that are genuinely ignorant in the process. And the question is, do you step in and help them? Or if you've genuinely made a mistake, are you going to rectify that mistake? And I do think, mistakes are had. I had someone with an option agreement, and the option plan was off by a couple of millimeters, and we had to get that rectified, and it made a difference. But irrespective of my client having to pay to have it rectified, he did the right thing and got it rectified. So we got it wrong initially, not through anyone's fault, but the ethical thing was to put it right, so you don't knowingly make that error and then just pretend or put it under the carpet and hope no one picks up on it. And I think that's what we're trying to point out here. It's when you knowingly commit an act or say something and it's not the correct thing, and you're hoping it just never gets discovered. That, to me, is what brings... It's what gives, for example, solicitors that just do conveyancing high PI indemnity fees to their professional indemnity insurers, because the area of conveyancing is so high risk. Then you've got, say, you talk about ignorance. You've got people looking at property information forms who are not equipped to do that. They haven't got the knowledge. They can't advise the client as to next steps. So things get bypassed, and that may very well just be negligent because the wrong person's looking at the forms. Are you under an obligation if you as a solicitor realize your client's selling a property, they filled out some forms, and you know that the information is incorrect because you've got contradictory paperwork? Are you under an obligation to say to that client, look, I know you said there were no insurance claims on your property information form, but I can see a whole host of claims that you've made in the past. You need to disclose this. And that it's not a defense for solicitors to say, I am instructed that this wasn't the case, especially if they have contradictory information. The correct thing to do is to recluse yourself from acting if you know that you are perpetuating an unethical situation. You need to cease to act. And that is the obligation that we've got, an obligation to, as officers of the court, to do the right thing. So I don't go back to, I think in terms of the whole unethical thing, solicitors are under a really difficult or high level of requirement to comply with ethics, whereas the other professionals, you take an estate agent, for example, and it's almost as if, well, they're not bound by anything. They can say whatever. They need to get the property sold. You have a mortgage broker who I had a client who came to me who inherited 3 properties. All 3 properties were subject to possession claims. He inherited 3 unencumbered properties. All 3 were subject to repossession claims because he went to a broker, borrowed money from a subprime lender, and had to pay compounded interest on these properties to the point where all of the equity in the properties were eaten up by the compounded interest in those mortgages. Now, where is the ethics there? Because this guy clearly, he didn't understand what he was doing, and while that's not an excuse, because he should have reached out to a solicitor and gotten some advice, he's now in a situation where he's going to lose 3 properties that he inherited, which is quite silly, really. So was that broker under a duty of care? Or where is the ethics there? Someone said to me the other day, what's the criteria for being a broker in this country? And the other person responded, you just roll out of bed. There's no criteria. One week you can be working in Sainsbury's, and the next week you could be brokering mortgages. This needs to be, there is that sort of gap, that lacune in the qualification for people within this industry that needs to be changed, because they need to be educated that, look, this is wrong. And also, where is the accountability and them being penalized for doing something like this? Why would you cause a lot of emotional aggro as well as financial issues to an individual and just take your commission out of it and not have any repercussions thereafter? That, I think, is the major problem, because what you've done is you've taken solicitors and you've overburdened them insofar as you have to do this, this, and this. Sometimes solicitors are doing the underwriting on a case. They're doing the valuations on a case, because we're looking at everything, because we know that if it goes wrong, the claim is going to come after, the client's going to come after our PI. And that's the surefire thing of what people do. Whereas the other stakeholders, they get to make passing statements, etc., but there is no repercussion to that. And that is wrong, because a valuer often will go on site when a solicitor isn't going on site. The solicitor will just look at the paper and can't really say, well, okay, there's a disparity in the description of the planning permission, because what I've seen physically isn't what's on paper. The solicitor's just looking at what's on paper. So really, other stakeholders, in terms of dealing with ethics and perhaps getting this, getting people a little bit more accountable, regulation needs to come in to, regulate what brokers do and create a penal system where they know, look, if we get it wrong, we are going to be penalized just as much as any other stakeholder in the transaction.
Wow. Well, you can see that Juliet feels quite strongly about the topic. Hamish, in your experience, are people getting more or less moral when it comes to property transactions?
I think it's, Chris said it earlier, it's rather hard to sort of measure it in a way, because these circumstances do actually sort of come up. I must admit, when we first started our work, which was going into the local authorities and gathering information, anybody could actually sort of go in there and request sight of that particular sort of information with no background, no experience. They could just do it. Right, with the estate agent, there wasn't anything regulatory about that sort of whole thing. And then along came the Property Codes Compliance Board, which actually means that they're checking out, they're regulating exactly what you're doing to process your searches. So that gave us an excellent sort of position, to actually sort of fit. So not only do we ourselves comply with those particular sort of regulations, anybody that we actually sort of ask to work on our behalf, because it's outside of the area that we're working council-wise, they are regulated as well. And there's a safety in that. And I think, as has been sort of intimated in many, many cases, not so much today, we can have a serious issue with estate agents. And I had one particular sort of case, and this particular property that was being sold by the estate agent, the sale had fallen through 5 times with the same estate agent.
Yikes.
And what I decided I ought to do, now it was going to be a cash transaction, and the buyer sort of said, well, he didn't think he needed any searches. I said, well, best you did get some searches on it, and it's best you get a surveyor to have a look at it. And when I spoke to the first surveyor I spoke to locally, who I knew, he turned around and he said, best I didn't, Hamish, carry out the surveying work on this one, because I've looked at it previously, and therefore I'm going to be biased. Now, the estate agent knew all of this. And as it sort of so happened, this was another case when it actually sort of fell through. As I said, it was going to be a cash purchase, should have been done very, very quickly. And as was found, there was a loft conversion there. There was absolutely no mention of it because he didn't have planning permission. There was no building control on it. Basically the extension that it actually put on the side of the house, and what it was, apparently the boyfriend of the owner had said, oh, I can do that for you. I'm, a part-time builder and stuff like that. But the first of all, the estate agent knew why it had fallen through previously. But he wasn't admitting that. He wasn't telling anybody that. Why? Because he wanted to make his money. He wanted to actually shift it.
All right.
So there can actually be situations.
Wow. Chris, just before we let Hamish wind up, it appears to me that anyone in the service industry within the property market sector, the moment they advise, the moment they give forth on any topic that will affect the sale or the progress of a property purchase, they are committing some sort of moral standpoint, are they not? And therefore, it seems to be crazy that people aren't taking it on their shoulders and saying, "I stand by that. I'm making a moral stance."
Listen, you've got to. in any walk of life, you've got to be straight with people as much as is possible. And Juliet makes a great point in the accountability. It's difficult. It's difficult to do properly, to own your shit. So yeah, I guess from that perspective, knowing people who do take accountability of their actions and do what they can to correct their mistakes, those are the people you want to be working with. Those are the people that are genuinely trustworthy, and you should be incorporating them into your team or asking them for who their recommendations of who their team are. And the people that don't own it or that try and hide or shy away from their mistakes, they're the ones to swerve. Avoid them like the plague. It's pretty basic when it comes down to it. We all know these moral things. We all have that compass in our head, bar the 10% of psychopaths that just ignore it. Yeah, it's there. You can tap into it.
All right. Hamish, would you take us home, please?
Well, just bring up the subject. It's not actually to promote the work we're actually doing tomorrow in our cladding matters, where we're actually investigating and looking to see what's going on. We have a serious situation, and it's okay. We're looking at the Royal Artillery Quays at this moment in time, and the council itself is signing off 6, or is it 8 properties? I can't remember. Is it 6 or 8? But it doesn't really matter. Oh yes, that's 1 plus 7. They're signing off on these and there has been advice given by so many different people, manufacturers of cladding, the fire people, and even their own building control have said this building's unsafe. Yet the council leader, first of all, said this place is perfectly all right. There's nothing wrong with this, and the council could be protecting any people attempting to purchase it. And I've actually come across 2 people so far who've bought properties in Royal Artillery Quays, and they didn't know that there was a cladding issue. They didn't know that it was going to have to undergo remediation, and they were going to be slapped with a bill. It was initially £15,000, but in reality, that was illegal because the management company couldn't actually do that. But all of these things happened. Everybody received a bill for £15,000. So any new person coming in, but there wasn't any information relative to that particular, because we actually carried out a search on some of the properties. There's no indication in the council records of any of this stuff. So, are they concealing it purposely?
Who can tell? Who can tell? All right. Well, look, thank you one and all for attending today's Property Quorum. I hope you found it as fill in the blank, as I did. And although it's reassuring to know that there are some decent players, and I count the gathered amongst them, there are people out there that you need to swerve, to use Chris's word, and build a team around you of people that you can rely on to give honest opinions and to stand by whatever assignations they've made. That's my only advice, much as it is. Thank you once again, Juliet Babula of Gunnercook, Hamish McClay of Surgical, Chris Gilson of Root Home, and to you out there, check, and check again. And also, of course, look after your mental health. Until next week, bye-bye.